For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1376 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 86, House Resolution 1376. Resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider in the House a resolution, House Resolution 1371, strongly condemning the Biden administration and its border czar, Kamala Harris's failure to secure the United States border. The amendment to the preamble printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The resolution as amended shall be considered as read. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the resolution and preamble as amended to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question, except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is now recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman and my good friend from Massachusetts, pending which I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. The rule provides for consideration of H.Res. 1371, a resolution strongly condemning the Biden administration and its border czar, Harris. Their failure to secure the U.S. border under a closed rule with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees. Mr. Speaker, since Biden-Harris took office, American leadership both at home and abroad has become weak and feckless. And that's just putting it mildly. On the global stage, we have seen the Houthis creating chaos in the Red Sea after the administration delisted them as a foreign terrorist organization. And then just last week, they successfully launched a deadly suicide drone attack in Tel Aviv. Iran has grown stronger and more dangerous than ever. Their proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, are launching a 2-front war against Israel and have attacked our service members over 100 times since October 7th. And now their nuclear program is 1 or 2 weeks away from the time needed to produce enough weapons-grade material for a nuclear weapon. Even Secretary Blinken stated, and I quote, "Where we are now is not a good place." Now, I can continue talking about the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, about Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine, following the administration's decision to greenlight Nord Stream 2, or I could talk about record high inflation reaching over 20% under Biden and Harris. But the biggest failure is the crisis at the southern border. Just 64 days into this administration, Biden named Harris his border czar. Now my friends from across the aisle are trying to cover up her failures as border czar and trying to argue that she was never even in charge. But to their chagrin, I brought receipts with me. So let me read you a few headlines and quotes. Here's Axios on the 14th of April, 2021, and I quote, "The number of unoccupied minors crossing the border has reached crisis levels. Harris, appointed by Biden as border czar, said she would be looking at the quote-unquote root causes that drive migration." Now, that was Axios in 2021. Here's another headline from the Associated Press on March 24th, 2021. That headline is, "Biden taps VP Harris to lead response to border challenges." Here's another one from Axios, March 24th, 2021. "Biden puts Harris in charge of border crisis." And just wait for it. Here's President Biden on that same day, March 24th, 2021. Biden's exact quote, "She's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle, and the countries that are going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border," end quote. That was Joe Biden. And the president went on further. He said, and I quote again, "It's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort, because I think the best thing to do is put someone who, when he or she speaks, they don't have to wonder about, is that where the president is? As she speaks for me, doesn't have to check with me," end quote. So now the debate has been settled. President Biden clearly put Vice President Harris in charge of the border. And what did the border czar Harris do? 94 executive actions related to the border, the Biden-Harris administration. They halted the construction of the border wall and ended Remain in Mexico, and they established the Catch and Release program. And what were the results? Well, in February 2021, the country witnessed a 174% increase in southwest border encounters compared to February of 2020. On her watch, there have been over 9.6 million illegal immigrant encounters nationwide. Experts estimate the number of known gotaways, those are illegal immigrants who have evaded capture, those exceed 2 million. And in May of 2021, CBP encountered over 180,000 individuals attempting to enter the country illegally along the southwest border. That was a staggering 675% increase from May of 2020. Since fiscal year 2021, 378 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list have been apprehended at our southern border. In June, NBC reported that over 400 illegal immigrants with ties to ISIS entered the U.S. under border czar Harris, and 50 of these individuals, their whereabouts are still unknown. So in fiscal year 2024, there have been a record-breaking 31,000 Chinese nationals encountered at the southwest border. And perhaps the worst stat of them all, we've lived through 39 months where the total encounters have been higher than even the highest month seen under President Trump. So this is a really simple vote. If you're okay with those results, go ahead and vote no. If you think border czar Harris has failed the American people, vote yes. It's really that simple. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Right there at the top. There's
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Yeah, before I even get into my speech, the gentleman referred to Axios as this mainstream publication that referred to the Vice President as the border czar. I think he might have missed the correction that Axios issued. An editor's note here said, this article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar in 2021. So I'm happy to pass on the correction. Again, that for the record, I think my Republican friend should stick to the facts. But again, honestly, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I don't think we should even be spending a single second on this debate, because this resolution is a total and complete insult to this institution. This all started with an emergency meeting in the Rules Committee last night. An emergency. Drop everything and come to the Rules Committee. And what did the Republicans bring up? Not legislation to help working Americans, not a bill to ensure the safety of our communities, not something to actually secure the southern border or fix our broken immigration system. No, none of that. They called an emergency meeting to attack Vice President Harris. That's the emergency. They want to hold a Trump rally here in the Capitol building. They are weaponizing Congress and using our time to produce a political attack ad. So let's set the record straight. This resolution originally called Vice President Harris Biden's border czar, not because that was her title, but because of a lie that MAGA media outlets just made up. The Vice President was never put in charge of the border. She was given a diplomatic role to focus on resolving some of the long-term, big-picture root causes of immigration crisis. Her job was to help give migrants options in their home countries so that fewer of them would make the journey north. And guess what? She delivered. $5.2 billion in private sector commitments that will give people jobs, opportunity, and hope in their home countries. That's what leadership looks like. That's what action looks like. And do you know what happened? Illegal border crossings just hit a 3-year low in June, Mr. Speaker. Let me repeat that. Illegal border crossings currently are way down. But that's not what you'll hear from the other side today. They're going to twist themselves into knots, blaming everything on Kamala Harris. But their blame game just highlights what is going on here. Republicans don't care about fixing our immigration system. They had a chance to do something, and they blocked bipartisan progress for their own political gain. On day one in office, President Biden and Vice President Harris put forth a plan to create a fair and just immigration system. Republicans refused to act. President Biden and Vice President Harris then worked across the aisle to put together a historic bipartisan immigration bill. And Trump told Republicans to kill it, and they did. They want a crisis at the border because it helps them with their political messaging. And so what did they bring to the floor instead? A pointless, useless, non-binding resolution. It has all the legislative authority of a Fox News soundbite or a Trump Truth Social rant. Now, so we know how this is going to go. The other side is going to rant and rave about numbers. They will tell very sad stories about families that have been impacted by our broken immigration system, stories that honestly do break my heart. But what Republicans will not do is actually do anything about it. This meaningless, feckless, slanderous resolution won't help a single grieving family. It won't do a single thing to make America safer. Nothing. It won't strengthen our border. It won't create a better immigration system. It's just a chance for House Republicans to bash someone that they are afraid of. And they are melting down over Kamala Harris. I mean, they have completely lost their minds since she became the Democratic Party's presumptive nominee. They are scared. They are scared, Mr. Speaker, because she offers America something that Donald Trump could never. She offers decency, she offers unity, and she offers hope. And I get it. I get it. Republicans are scared of the excitement surrounding her candidacy. Maybe they're afraid their nominee is too boring or won't be able to keep up. After all, he is the oldest presidential nominee in our nation's history. Maybe they're afraid they're going to lose. You'd think they'd focus on actually passing something meaningful. They've canceled Congress next week because they're too incompetent to even pass their own appropriation bills. 3 of the 4 funding bills were pulled this week because Republicans didn't have the votes. And it's sad, it really is sad, because the United States Congress should be a place where we advance legislation that actually helps people. But because House Republicans are incapable of doing that, they are rallying behind this do-nothing, pathetic, purely political resolution. Mr. Speaker, they should be embarrassed. This resolution is beneath the dignity of this institution, and they should be ashamed of themselves. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. I would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities toward nominees for the office of president. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
If you want to talk about being ashamed, let's talk about who should be ashamed. It's Biden and Harris. They have been a complete disaster, especially with the southern border. And, excuse me for being so audacious as to bring facts and figures to a debate, but I guess I have to apologize for bringing more facts and figures to a debate. Let's go through a few of them. The Biden-Harris administration has failed to remove 99.7% of illegal immigrants released in the United States. Here's another stat. In June, there were 130,419 illegal immigrant encounters at our southern border. This is roughly 4,300 daily encounters, which is, wait for this, 4 times more than the definition of a crisis that was set by Obama's own DHS Secretary Johnson, who said in 2019 that, and I quote, more than 1,000 encounters a day would overwhelm the system. That was President Obama's DHS Secretary. You want to talk about more facts and figures? May 2024, the Committee on Homeland Security Republicans released documents showing the Biden administration, wait for this, secretly flew over 400,000 illegal immigrants into our country. Harris still has only visited our southern border once since she became border czar. It took her a total of 93 days to make a token trip to El Paso, which is 800 miles from the sector experiencing the worst numbers. Then in an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, Harris was asked, "Do you have any plans to visit the border?" She replied, "At some point, we are going to the border." And then she said, "We've been to the border," to which Lester Holt replied, "You haven't been to the border." Harris replied, "And I haven't been to Europe." You just can't make this stuff up. Then former Border Patrol Chief Ortiz stated, and I quote, "I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem." Current Border Patrol Chief Owens felt her absence as well, reporting that the VP has not spoken with him since she was appointed in July of 2023. But for more on this, I want to yield 3 minutes to my good friend and the gentleman from the great state of Texas, the chairman of the Rules Committee, Dr. Burgess.
I thank my,
Gentleman is recognized for.
honestly, I keep hearing the term MAGA used by the other side. I'm referred to as MAGA. You keep saying that word. I don't think you know what it means. It's an acronym that stands for Make America Great Again. I don't know why anyone would take offense at that. If anything, it's something that should bring us all pride. But the nickname Czar is shorthand that's been used by the media. It's not new. This goes back to the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. Look, I think the point that many of us would like to make, and look, it's no secret that the mainstream media is basically a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party. It has been for years. And it's ironic that today, suddenly, the mainstream media has decided the use of the term czar, which they threw around freely during the Obama administration, they threw around freely earlier in this administration. Now that term is one that, well, they used it inappropriately. And I'll help the ranking member. I've brought the Axios quote that he referenced, because now this morning, magically they say, hey, we were wrong 3 years ago when we referred to Vice President Harris as a czar. Again, the term has been used under Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, President Obama, and twice under President Trump. I mean, who can forget the famous car czar, right? Steve Ratner. Who can forget the healthcare czar in the Obama administration, Nancy Ann DeParle? These terms were used as an effort to elevate someone's status. They were working in the White House on a particular issue. They'd never gone through Senate confirmation. Vice President Harris was appointed by President Biden to fix the crisis at the border. And my constituents in Texas have witnessed firsthand the situation on the border is not fixed. Communities are constantly being flooded by illegal immigrants, and this leads to the flow of drugs and the rise of crime. Now, because she's a presumptive nominee for president, to protect her campaign, the leftist media is trying to change the story and mislead the American people. Republicans are being accused of fabricating the title. Yet those same media outlets who are proclaiming her the border czar are now claiming this was falsely reported by their very news outlets. This was falsely reported 3 years ago. Regardless of how the minority wants to describe her, she was tasked with managing the border. And on her watch, well over 9 million illegal immigrant encounters occurred. Illegal immigrants who have evaded capture are well over 2 million. American lives have been lost as a result of the Vice President's failure of her principal task, defending the border. I'll yield
Gentleman,
back.
time has expired.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president or vice president. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
God, you can't make this stuff up, Mr. Speaker. So first of all, let me set the record straight. The original version of this resolution said, quote, President Biden asked Vice President Kamala Harris to serve as the administration's border czar, end quote, which he did not do. I don't know, someone made it up, I think, I don't know. And after my colleagues and I pointed out that fact, the gentleman from Pennsylvania and their side of the aisle, of the, their side of the Republican side of the committee scrambled to try to find a shred of proof that, in fact, Biden actually appointed her as as a border czar, and they couldn't find anything. So they made a frantic last-minute change to now say that Vice President Harris, quote, came to be known colloquially as the Biden administration's border czar, end quote. I mean, we caught you, but I mean, come on. This would be comical if it weren't such a monumental waste of time and taxpayer dollars, and all for a resolution that does absolutely nothing. The gentleman from Pennsylvania went on a big rant, throwing out all kinds of numbers and identifying all kinds of problems that we're faced with. And I'm trying to figure out where in this four-page bill there is anything, in this four-page resolution, where there is anything that would do anything to solve any of the issues that he raised. There's nothing. This is a non-binding resolution. This will never become law. This doesn't even go to the Senate. I mean, this is like voting on a press release. I mean, what a colossal waste of time. My Republican friends love to complain, but they don't want to do anything to fix anything. And this is the latest example. What a waste of time for this institution to have to concern itself with a glorified press release. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from Scripps News entitled, quote, "No, Vice President Kamala Harris was never named border czar." I request unanimous consent to insert into the record a Time magazine article entitled, "Kamala Harris was never Biden's border czar. Here's what she really did." Mr. Speaker, I'm going to also ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a July 17, 2024 article from the New York Times entitled, "Why Republicans Keep Calling Kamala Harris the Border Czar." Mr. Speaker,
Without objection.
contrary to what the gentleman keeps saying, the idea that Kamala Harris is the border czar was invented by right-wing media. And let me read to you from the article I just inserted. I quote here. Ms. Harris was not, in fact, appointed border czar, nor was she tasked with addressing the border problems plaguing the border itself. It goes on to say, and I quote, rather, she was deputized by President Biden with the diplomatic mission of solving the, quote, root causes of migration from countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, tackling issues that spur people to flee in the first place, like drug violence and the lack of economic opportunity. Mr. Speaker, in fact, my Republican colleagues had to change their resolution, as I mentioned, at the last minute in the Rules Committee last night because we caught them. We caught them. Because they actually acknowledged by changing their resolution that President Biden never, in fact, named President Harris the border czar. And they changed their resolution to acknowledge that fact that border czar is a term that basically they made up. So, Mr. Speaker, so why are we here? Why are we doing this? We're doing this because they're afraid of the vice president. She's drawing huge crowds, this incredible excitement, and they're in a panic. They don't know what to do. God forbid they bring any legislation to the floor to actually help the American people or help solve any crisis that we're faced with. Instead, a glorified press release comes to the floor so that they can, rant and rave and point fingers and yell and scream and get everybody all, up in arms. Bottom line is, this is like one of the biggest wastes of time that I can recall ever coming to this floor. And we've done a lot of things here under their leadership that I think is a waste of time. Let me reserve my time at this point.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Well, I've seen gaslighting, but I've never seen gaslighting to this extent. This is quite amazing. But before we get into gaslighting, let's talk about a quick history lesson. The president that I recall throwing around the term czar was President Obama. He had a car czar with the Cash for Clunkers program. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. This is the same president that allowed Russia to invade Crimea. And this is the same president who went up to the then president of Russia, I believe, Dmitry Medvedev, and said, I just need a little flexibility. Tell Vlad I just got to get through this election cycle, and then we can talk. So that president named a czar, and that became part of our lexicon. And now we're being attacked because we're calling Harris the border czar. Axios, as I said before, in 2021, April 14, 2021, ran an article referring to Harris as the border czar. I'll quote again. The number of unaccompanied minors crossing the border has reached crisis levels. Harris, appointed by Biden as border czar, says it right here in the article, said she would be looking at the root causes that drive migration. Now, you can say Axios retracted that. They retracted that 3 years after, when that became politically inconvenient for the Democrats. They're now trying to say that Harris had nothing to do with the border. Unfortunately for the Democrats, we have a slew of other statements and articles that say that Biden put Harris in charge of the border. Here's Axios again, March 24th, 2021. The title of the article is "Biden puts Harris in charge of the border crisis." It doesn't get more clear than that. Here's remarks by the president when he was at a state dining room. This is in March 24th, 2021. This is Biden talking about Harris. "She's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle, and the countries that help are going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border." Again, that's President Biden telling people at a state dinner that he's putting Harris in charge of the border. Here's another AP article. The article is titled, "Biden Taps VP Harris to Lead Response to Border Challenges." You can quibble about names. If she was called the border czar, is it popular in our lexicon? If she was called whatever, the fact remains, the president put the vice president in charge of managing the border crisis, and it has been an abysmal failure. The stats speak for themselves. I'll get to more stats later on in the debate, but I want to yield 4 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from New York and fellow member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Langworthy.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of thousands of Americans die every year from fentanyl. Communities, including many in my own district, have been ripped apart by the scourge of this deadly poison. I've hosted roundtables with local law enforcement, families of victims, and other advocates all across my district. One thing I have consistently heard is that we need to stop the flow of fentanyl into this country. Our police officers are struggling to keep up with the constant influx into our communities, and it's killing some of our youngest and brightest citizens. Every American knows these deadly substances are flooding across our borders, brought to this country by criminals who directly benefit from the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies. We also can't forget the other Americans who have been assaulted and murdered by illegal immigrants who are allowed to enter this country. Laken Riley is dead. Rachel Morin is dead. Others have lost their lives, and even children have been brutally assaulted. Why? So our border czar, Kamala Harris, could score political points with a radical left wing of her party. Meanwhile, the state of New York's going bankrupt, spending billions of dollars to pay for housing and benefits and food for this flood of illegal immigrants who are being released into the interior of this country. Again, this is a direct result of the open borders and sanctuary policies of the Democrat Party under Biden-Harris. And Vice President Harris, the anointed border czar, wholeheartedly supports these policies. Time and again, she looks the American people in the eye who have seen loved ones die of fentanyl overdoses or have been the victims of criminals who are in this country illegally, and she lies to them. She lectures the American people about the root causes of illegal immigration and pretends that her policies had nothing to do with this historic crisis. We're not buying it, and the American people won't buy it in November. Rather than visit our southern border, she led a junket to Central America to plead and to beg migrants to not come. It doesn't get more pathetic than begging other countries while paying lip service to Americans who are feeling the real pain of this crisis. Now, of course, this is entirely consistent with Vice President Harris's failed leadership in this administration. The condescension and virtue signaling may play well among the liberal coastal elites who are now circling the wagons to ensure that she's slammed in there as the Democrat presidential nominee in August. But the American people see her failures for what they are. People are suffering. People are dying from this crisis that Kamala Harris and President Biden have created. Kamala Harris deserves full condemnation, and I am glad to see the House take up this resolution. And, you know, I'm going to sit and wait for the condemnation of the little Democratic rally that was held for Kamala Harris over at Union Station today. And with that, I yield back.
Reserve.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the Vice President. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I have an opiate problem in my district as well. This is a serious issue. But the gentleman just got on the floor and ranted and raved about the fentanyl problem. While he was going on, I was reading this bill. The word fentanyl isn't even mentioned once in this. In this press release, that is useless, that does nothing. It doesn't even mention the word fentanyl. I mean, what's going on over here? And and again, the gentleman from Pennsylvania didn't answer my question. For all the issues he raised here, where in this bill is there funding or solutions to deal with the fentanyl problem, or to deal with securing the border, or to provide more assistance for our border security? There's nothing. There's nothing in this. This is useless. It's a press release. It's a press release. This is what we're spending our time on. We could probably come together and maybe figure out some concrete things we can do to save lives so people don't die from fentanyl. We could probably come together and find some commonality to figure out ways to strengthen our border. But let me just tell the gentleman that one of the reasons why the border is the way it is and the immigration system is so messed up is because Congress has refused to act. And every time we try to get something to the floor, Republicans find a way to derail it. So give me a break. What a waste of time. What a waste of time. This is pathetic. Mr. Speaker, I want to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
The gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. We had to rush over last night to an emergency rules committee to engage in this emergency resolution. This is an emergency. It's Republican panic. House Republicans are afraid of Vice President Harris. House Republicans are afraid of the energy and the excitement Vice President Harris inspires in Americans. She is a new generation of a leader who is bringing us a vision of prosperity and opportunity for all Americans. They are afraid of that vision. They are afraid of the vision because she has been fighting for working families, for unions, for women who want reproductive freedom. Vice President Harris' vision stands in stark contrast to the vengeful and hateful policies House Republicans and their nominee propose. Republicans and their nominee want to divide Americans, while Vice President Harris wants to unite Americans. She wants to make sure she fights for reproductive freedom for women. She will fight to make sure that we have access to contraception, to IVF, but what does the dark vision of the Republicans and their Project 2025 propose? They propose a national abortion ban. They propose restricting women's ability to make their own choices. They propose controlling Americans, controlling women. And let's talk about immigration, since that is in the title of this. For decades, House Republicans have been the ones who block many meaningful immigration and border bills. They refuse to participate in bipartisan solutions, which we know are necessary for immigration and the border. Bipartisan. Congress, we're the ones who must act. This year, Vice President Harris, along with President Biden, Democrats and Senate Republicans, made a deal on immigration reform and border security. Then former President Trump asked them to kill the border deal, and so House Republicans did. They declared it dead on arrival in the House. House Republicans don't have a real solution for the border because they don't actually want to fix it. If they did, what would they talk about? Because everything they propose is dark. It is always siding with the billionaires and the richest corporations instead of the working families. You know what? I am excited by Vice President Harris. It is telling how scared the Republicans are of our nominee for president. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not afraid of the Vice President Harris, and neither are any of my colleagues. But the people that should be most afraid of the Vice President are the American people. You want to go back and talk about the southern border? Every single day in this country, roughly 300 Americans die of fentanyl overdoses. That would be the equivalent of a commercial jetliner going down every single day, once a day, for the last 4 years. That should scare the American people. You want to talk about more things? Let's talk about crime under this administration. Americans continue to be the victims of violent crime under the Biden-Harris administration. According to the Major Cities Chiefs Association 2022 crime report for urban areas across the country, homicides were up 13% since 2020. Rapes were up 23.56% since 2020. Aggravated assaults were up 33.89% again since 2020. In 2022, at least 9 cities, 7 of which are Democrat-run, saw record homicides. 2021 was the deadliest year in 2 decades for our law enforcement officers. But just listen to their party leaders like Vice President Harris. She supports defunding the police. She believes it's, and I quote, wrong-headed and outdated to think police officers make our community safe. She wants to give voting rights to murderers, terrorists, rapists, and even inmates that are sitting on death row. Harris wants to abolish ICE, which protects our communities from illegal aliens and the crimes they commit. And she believes cash bail should be eliminated. The only time Vice President Harris has called for law enforcement to get involved was when Jussie Smollett said men with red MAGA hats were after him. Harris called it a modern-day lynching. And of course, this was an absolute hoax that was fabricated by the radical left with the help of no other than Vice President Harris. So Americans should be afraid of the policies of the Vice President. With that, I reserve.
Reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself some time. Mr. Speaker, I can tell they're afraid of the Vice President because that's all they want to talk about. They're obsessed. But real-time fact check, Mr. Speaker. This resolution does nothing to help any of the immigration problems that anyone on the other side of the aisle is talking about. No money, nothing. No laws, nothing. This is a press release. But I want to correct the record on Vice President Harris because what is being repeated on this floor this afternoon is totally divorced from reality. Kamala Harris has won election after election by inspiring and uniting people. She earned her spot as Vice President the old-fashioned way through hard work, political courage, and fighting for a better country. And that is why Republicans are afraid of her. And I get why they're afraid. I get the contrast isn't great for them right now. As a prosecutor, Kamala Harris took on perpetrators and put sexual abusers in jail, going after fraudsters who ripped off consumers and cheaters who broke the rules for their own personal gain. As Attorney General, Kamala Harris won a $20 billion settlement for people whose homes had been foreclosed on, putting $20,000 back into the pockets of victims of unethical foreclosures. Kamala Harris went after for-profit college scammers who forced them to return money to students and veterans that they stole from. Kamala Harris is fighting nonstop to protect the freedom of women to make their own choice about their own bodies, while Republicans want to institute Project 2025 to ban abortion nationwide. Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote to pass the Inflation Reduction Act that is lowering drug costs for seniors and people with diabetes. And that is exactly why my Republican friends are terrified, and they are attacking her in the most vicious, personal, and insulting fashion. Here are some of the quotes from some of our colleagues in Congress. These aren't right-wing media pundits. These are members of Congress. Quote, 100% she was a DEI hire. Quote, I think she was a DEI hire, and I think that's what we're seeing. Another quote, Democrats have to stick with her because of her ethnic background. I mean, what is this, 1951? I knew they were trying to take us backwards, but this is a new low. It's beyond offensive. We all know what this is. We all know what motivates these kind of comments. And I'd say it on the floor, but I'd probably have my words taken down again. Maybe they think it's easier to silence me than to debate me. Maybe they're afraid of the truth. And the truth is that this resolution reeks of desperation. The truth is they want to distract from the Vice President's incredible track record of success, including the fact that she secured $5.2 billion in private sector commitments that will go towards addressing the underlying causes of migration that push people to our southern border in the first place. And I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. All right, I've got to read a quick admonition here. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the Vice President, including by making reference to other sources that would have been out of order if spoken in the member's own words. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. So let me just get this straight. By the minority's logic, because Republicans are talking about Vice President Harris, we're somehow afraid of Vice President Harris. That's quite amazing, because for the last 8 years, they've been talking about President Trump. So I'll let the American people decide who's afraid of who. But to the attack that we have done nothing about the southern border, I can give the Democrats some ideas of what to do. How about they can start requesting that the administration go back and repeal the 94 executive orders that they issued when they took office, which repealed President Trump's executive orders to secure the southern border. That would be a great start. You don't even need congressional action to undo those executive orders. I have not heard of one of my Democratic colleagues call for any of those executive orders to be reversed. Here's another good idea, H.R. 2. This chamber passed H.R. 2. It was the first border security bill that was passed in this chamber, I believe, since the mid-90s. That was a great bill. It ended catch and release. It reinstated Remain in Mexico. It required that this administration finish the border wall. That would definitely halt illegal immigration. That is sitting over in the Senate. Maybe my friends from across the aisle here could ask the other chamber to run that bill. Just a few ideas. And I love it when I hear my colleagues talking about so-called bans. There's a few bans that the vice president is in favor of. Let's go through some of those. Under President Biden and Vice President Harris, the administration has supported bans on the following: gas-powered vehicles, gas stoves, firearms, and LNG exports. But that's not enough for the vice president. Harris wants to go even further than Biden. She supports bans on, and this is a great list, it's like it's written by the Babylon Bee or something. She supports bans on red meat, plastic straws, private health insurance, fracking, and gas-powered school buses. You know, before you know it, the average American is going to have to show their grocery list to Czar Harris before they go to the grocery store. With that, I reserve.
Massachusetts is recognized.
I guess Mr. Speaker, I guess the talking points from the NRCC went out because I think the gentleman just read them to us. But a couple of things. The gentleman talks about H.R. 2. They got 32 votes in the Senate. They killed it. It's dead, right? And then he talks about Homeland Security appropriation bills. It wasn't killed in the Senate. My Republican friends in the House killed their own bill in the House. It's dead. Didn't go anywhere. You didn't send it over to the Senate. So give me a break. Oh my goodness. And what are we left with? A non-binding resolution. A non-binding resolution that does nothing. I mean, that's the big plan. A press release. Oh, well, I'm not going to say that because I'll get my words taken down. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge that we defeat the previous question. And if we do, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 16, the American Dream and Promise Act of 2023. Mr. Speaker, the Bipartisan American Dream and Promise Act provides a pathway to citizenship for people who only know America as their home. They contribute to society as taxpayers, small business owners, educators, and more. Dreamers were brought to the United States as children through no fault of their own. It's past time to open the doors and empower these talented individuals by granting them access to citizenship that they rightfully deserve. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to fix our broken immigration system and secure our border. H.R. 16 won't solve every issue, but it will address a long-standing one in our failing immigration system. It's the right thing to do, and it has the added benefit of being a bill that actually does something as compared to the resolution that we're dealing with right now. So instead of considering the do-nothing Republican non-binding resolution before us, which is nothing but an RNC press release, and a bad one at that, let's consider actual legislation to start fixing these issues. Let's bring up H.R. 16. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And to discuss our proposal, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question and support the American Dream and Promise Act. Well, here we are again, wasting our time on yet another border resolution that does nothing, nada, to secure our border, reform a broken immigration system, or provide relief to the undocumented community. This time, however, it's a little different twist because they are targeting Vice President Kamala Harris for political gain. They are spewing lies that she is Biden's border czar. Trust me, if she had been given that position, it would be border czarina. Because this is all a lie. It is false, period. She was tasked with leading diplomatic efforts in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to reduce migration from those countries. That's what she was tasked to do. Vice President Harris secured billions in private sector investments to promote democracy and economic opportunity in those countries. And we've seen huge improvements. The numbers don't lie. In 2023, migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador only made 22% of all border crossings, down from 41% in 2021. Huge improvement. But Republicans don't care about facts. They'd rather make up lies and get ready for the campaign rhetoric. They want to spew lies, plain and simple, for political gain. The reality is that they were serious about border security and fixing our immigration system. Well, here's an idea. They would work with Democrats. We have several solutions that we put forward, including my bill, the American Dream and Promise Act, which would finally provide Dreamers, TPS recipients.
I yield an additional 1 minute to the gentlelady.
The gentlelady is recognized for a minute.
It would provide Dreamers, TPS recipients, and DED beneficiaries with a pathway to citizenship. Not only is my bill bipartisan, and popular with my colleagues, 207 of whom are co-sponsors, but it's popular with the American people. Poll after poll shows that upwards of 70%, Mr. Speaker, of Americans support permanent solutions for Dreamers, because Americans support Dreamers and Dreamers support America. And they know that their home is here. They rose to the challenge during the pandemic and served as doctors and nurses and teachers. They serve in our military and protect our communities as law enforcement officers and firefighters. The American Dream and Promise Act is a real common sense solution and not a rhetoric bill. Not a MAGA waste of time. Enough of this pendejada, BS garbage. Let's move forward. I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question and instead support the American Dream and Promise Act, a real solution to provide relief to many people supported by Americans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers. I'm prepared to close, and with that, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire how much time I have left?
A gentleman has 7 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania has 10 minutes remaining.
Okay. I yield myself the remaining time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the 6th time House Republicans want us to vote on nearly the exact same do-nothing border resolution. The only difference is that this time they've slapped Vice President Harris's name on it because she's running against Donald Trump. Republicans are using official government resources to settle political scores. Isn't it wrong to use taxpayer money for a campaign rally? Has anyone checked with the FEC to see if this is even allowed? They are using your taxpayer money to turn this place into a testing ground for RNC attack ads. My Republican colleagues should be embarrassed by this. They talk about their precious H.R. 2 and Homeland Security bills. Newsflash, H.R. 2 is hot garbage. It's a horrible bill that only earned 32 votes in the Senate. Even Republicans in the Senate knew it was a bad bill. They keep saying H.R. 2 is the solution, but they don't even have the votes on their side to get it to the president. And let's not get started on their Homeland Security funding bills. Those bills never even made it to the Senate because they didn't send them over. The solution is to pass a bipartisan bill. But they are worried if they pass one, it actually might work. It might secure the border, and then they won't have anything to campaign on. At the end of the day, this is all about the fact that they have no vision, only division. No ideas, only attack ads. No plans, only meaningless resolutions that do nothing and aren't worth the paper that they are printed on that. Contrast that with Kamala Harris and Democrats in terms of what we are offering. And what we are offering are real solutions, real action, a future that guarantees every American has an opportunity to succeed. We aren't afraid to work across the aisle to get things done for this country. Republicans offer nothing but anger, fear, and petty name-calling. What a joke. What a joke. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, if anyone thinks this resolution is a good idea, I think they might be in a cult. Get out of here with this nonsense. Go back to worshiping a convicted felon and let us run this place like adults. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities toward nominees for the office of president. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm prepared to close, and I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, you want to talk about division? I've got a whole list of divisive quotes from my friends across the aisle. It starts at the very top. President Biden said, and this was just days before what happened in Pennsylvania, he said that we need to put a bullseye on President Trump. That was President Biden. Former Speaker Pelosi said, and I quote, "You have to be ready to take a punch, and therefore you have to be ready to throw a punch for the children." Senator John Tester, "I don't think even in states where Donald Trump won big, that it does you any good running away from Donald Trump. I think you need to go back and punch him in the face." That was a quote from John Tester. Here's Joe Biden again. I quote, "I said, if I were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him." Congresswoman Maxine Waters, she said this quote, "And with this kind of inspiration, I will go and take out Trump tonight." And for the vice president, she too has engaged in some divisive rhetoric. When asked in April 2018 if you had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions, who would it be? You know how the vice president responded? She said, "Does one of us have to come out alive?" So save me the rhetoric on divisiveness. I think the American people know where the divisive language is coming from. But let's go back to the vice president and her role as border czar. At least that's what the media was calling her up until about 3 days ago. When Harris was tapped to be border czar, she promised to, quote, undo President Trump's border policies. And unfortunately for the American people, she made good on that promise. The Biden-Harris administration has referred to the influx of illegals as newcomers. Their word, newcomers, not illegal immigrants. She has called for the decriminalization of illegal border crossings. Border czar Harris has even supported free health care and mass amnesty for illegal immigrants. And so the question is, who pays the price for this incompetence? Well, that answer is simple. That's the American people. The border crisis has cost the United States approximately $150.7 billion every single year. That's over $1,100 per year per every American taxpayer. In southwestern Pennsylvania, my congressional district, we're one of the epicenters of the opioid crisis. Since the passage of H.R. 2, over 17,000 pounds of fentanyl have been seized at the southern border. And to get your head around how much that actually is, well, that's enough fentanyl to kill over 3.8 billion people. Nearly 15 Pennsylvanians die from drug overdoses every single day. And like I said earlier in the debate, in the United States, roughly 300 Americans every single day die of a fentanyl overdose. Now, we've also heard horror stories like the murder of Laken Riley. Laken was a 22-year-old from Georgia who was killed by an illegal immigrant from Venezuela. Another American, Rachel Morin of Maryland, she was a mother of 5, by the way. She was raped and brutally murdered by an illegal from El Salvador. Her brother Michael stated after her death, and I quote her brother, "Joe Biden and his designated border czar, Kamala Harris, opened our borders to him and others like him, empowering them to victimize the innocent. Yet to this day, we have not heard from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They never apologized, end quote. These brutal deaths are a direct result of border czar Harris's inaction and failed policies. That's why this week, House Republicans will rightfully condemn the Biden-Harris administration for their epic failure at the southern border. And House Democrats, well, they'll stand over there and continue to support and stand by the border czar, Vice President Harris, since they are complicit partners in this man-made disaster at our southern border. This disaster has impacted every community in our nation. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. I move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
As for the yeas and nays, please.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.